Welcome everybody. Welcome to the third in our HearMus seminar series, which is providing a monthly forum for the discussion of a broad array of topics around music and hearing health. Could be music perception and hearing impairment, or hearing aids and music, individual differences in music perception and production, audiological practice, a really broad range of different topic areas around music and hearing health. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to hand over to my co-lead Kai to introduce our first speakers.
Yes, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all here this afternoon, and I have the pleasure to introduce today Stefania Serafin, who's professor in sonic interaction design at Aalborg University in Copenhagen. Stefania did her master's, the ATM master at IRCAM, followed by a PhD at Stanford University with Julius Smith. And nowadays she's head of the Multisensory Experience Lab at Aalborg University. And she's also doing a lot of stuff for the community. She's president of the Sound and Music Computing Association. She's project lead of the Nordic Sound and Music Computing Network. She's leader of the Sound and Music Computing Masters program at Aalborg University. So has a lot of interesting projects ongoing. And today she will be talking about research projects in the Multisensory Experience Lab at Aalborg, especially on technologies to help individuals with diverse hearing abilities, which is obviously a big concern for the HearMus seminar series. So we're very happy to have Stefania here today, and she's joined today by her Aalborg colleagues Francesco Ganis and Razvan Paisa. So we're very happy to have this trio talk today here in the seminar. Welcome, and we're very curious about your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kai, Alinka, for the invitation. As Kai mentioned, we are based at the Multisensory Experience Lab, which is a laboratory part of Aalborg University, but in the capital city of Copenhagen. And in our lab, we call it a Multisensory Experience Lab. We are mostly technologists that are interested to work with end users, and I will show you how we do that. And as Kai mentioned, first I will show you some projects related to virtual and augmented reality, and then Razvan will take over and talk about his work with vibrotactile feedback for individuals with hearing impaired, both in laboratory and concert settings. And then Francesco will talk a little bit about his work with children with hearing impairment. And after that, we hope to have some discussion, and we will also discuss what our main challenges in this kind of research. First of all, our name is a Multisensory Experience Lab because we have all a background in music technology, but we are very interested in understanding how we can use different technologies, different multisensory technologies, such as virtual augmented reality, haptic feedback, and so on, to help individuals with the different hearing abilities, but also how to use sound to help individuals, for example, with a motor impairment or visual impairment. But today we are focusing on individuals with different hearing abilities. And in our lab, we perform mostly three kinds of research. We develop the technologies, and we like to take them outside the lab, and also both for health and also for cultural applications. But for today, given the topic of the seminar, we are focusing on the health-related applications. And in all our projects, so as I mentioned, we are mostly engineers and computer scientists. So we don't know the issues that end users have. So we use what is called a participatory design approach, which means that we talk with the clinicians and we talk to the musicians And also, so we are standing in our labs in these XR developers, but we have a continuous and interactive communication, both with those that will use these technologies. So in case of this presentation, the individuals with the different hearing abilities, but also with their caregivers, and also with those that can help them, like, for example, musicians and clinicians. In this specific case for this presentation, we are focusing on the projects that we are performing in collaborations with the Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center and the Royal Danish Academy of Music. I can see here in the presentation there is also Jesper. He can jump later on in the Q&A. So Jesper, he is head of the Tomaster Education, but he's also doing a PhD on how to use, how to help individuals with different hearing abilities appreciate music, especially in concert settings. So you will see some projects about that. And the Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center is part of the largest hospital in Denmark, Rigshospitalet, where the speech and language pathologists, they're very interested in having technologies that go beyond the pen and paper, both to educate and train, especially children with different hearing skills. So all the projects that I'm going to present to you now, they are part of this collaboration. So as you probably know, what I would like to point out actually is that for us, working with individuals with hearing impairment is quite recent. We started only 3 years ago. Before we have been working a lot with music technology, but mostly for, I would say, musical applications or cultural applications. While this collaboration has become really active since 3 years ago. And one of the starting point was the fact, as you know, that I don't know if you ever took a hearing test, but it totally lacks ecological validity in the sense that you're sitting in a booth and you're listening to these warble tones, and you don't have the same kind of interactions that you have in the real world. So you're lacking the visual feedback, you're lacking the motor component. So one way to compensate with uncertainty of the real world and the staticity of the booth, listening booth, is by using virtual reality, because virtual reality can give you a confined environment where you can have some movement, you can have some visual, and you can have some haptic and sounds, of course, but they can all be controlled by the designer. So it's a compromise that is starting to be used more and more in hearing research to cope with the limitation of traditional testing methodologies. So this is because one of the things we need to do is learn how to help individuals to cope with the limitations that they have in real life. So this is the first project that we had together with the Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center, precisely in this direction of using virtual reality to help individuals with different hearing abilities to cope with everyday issues. Specifically, we were looking at teenagers. In Denmark, teenagers, they are performing pretty well, actually, even if they have a cochlear implant. This is because the government has decided that they get a hearing test very early in life, and they get a cochlear implant from few months old. And this, of course, as you know, our brain is plastic, so they can adapt very easily to the consequences of having hearing loss compensated by a cochlear implant. So they're doing pretty well, but still they're not doing perfect. So they might do well when they are in one-on-one conversations in spaces with good acoustics. But again, through talking to them, or better, speech and language pathologists talking to them, they realized, and this is the team of speech and language pathologists from the hospital, who in all our collaborations, they take care of evaluating the solutions together with us, but also talking to the end users, because it's better if somebody who is not directly involved in the development talks to the end users and gets a more, let's say, a less biased feedback. In this case, they found out, as it is known, that the children still have problems in everyday settings for sound localization, but mostly when they are, if they are in school, not if they are sitting in a classroom, but when they go in the playground, when there are lots of things happening and it is unpredictable who is moving where. So there they could still use some help in localizing who is speaking. So they miss mostly the social aspect of being a teenager, so the jokes and so on. And another issue that they have is when they visit a museum. So when they visit a museum, again, there is a lot of movement. There is a guide, but sometimes they forget or they are too shy to ask the guide to wear a microphone. So that is a challenge. So with this Listen Again project, so Lytte again is the Danish word for listen again. What we want to do is see if we can train using gamified virtual reality experience, if we can train the teens in these everyday issues and see then if they perform better in real world. So what happens is that the child comes to the lab, gets a portable virtual reality display, which is very easy to set up. And then they played for 3 months 2 kinds of games. One game was based on the Danish Music Museum, because again, the challenge is visiting a museum. Another game was based in a playground. And all the games, they are all sound-based. So they need to go around to find different sounds, recognize the timbre, recognize who is speaking, and so on. So, yeah, and every time they perform a task properly, they get some trophy. And so the game, we gave the head-mounted display home for 2 months. And I'm going to show you. So this is just the graphics. As you can see, we are not like a game company development with good graphic skill, but they liked this childish character. And so to the evaluation of the game, we had 22 children who participated. And again, they had it at home for 2 months. So they were supposed to play the game. We were gathering some data while they were playing. And also they were coming to the hospital for some focus group interviews to see how it was going. So the quantitative data, they are actually not as interesting as the qualitative data. So the qualitative data is that the children, after 2 weeks, they really enjoyed still playing. But after a month, the game was starting to become boring. So the training was too long. And this is because, again, we don't have the skills or the time to develop a full-fledged games that can be interesting for so long. So either we need to change the game design or we need to reduce the training. And we observe this in many of our solutions, actually, of training at home, that they tend to become tedious or they tend not to be used always by as we wish. Nonetheless, so this is just to see that how many minutes they played, and the two colors represent, we divided the children in 2 groups, elderly and the younger kids. So there is one, as you can see, the top black one, that played 650 minutes. So that's quite a bit. And also, it's nice to see that there is a pretty good correlation between how much they play and how many trophies. So they get better, but nobody, despite the fact that they said the game was not entertaining at the end, nobody managed to finish it all. The best got like 11 out of the 12 trophies. So this is to say that, yeah, another qualitative observation that was very interesting is in the last focus group, the children, they were saying that, oh, now when I go to the football club, I know where I have to place myself to listen to the coach. So it is nice that they can translate knowledge from the virtual world to the real world, even if it is different context. So even if it is more anecdotal rather than scientific result, it has an indication that this kind of training might work, but we need to rethink how to make it more interesting and maybe also more effective. But it's a way that they all actually enjoyed having the virtual reality gamified experience, at least at the beginning. And also, one interesting observation is that at the beginning of the project, there was an engineer, a sound engineer, who wanted us, so we are working with the sound localization, and we want to train them to localize sound. One sound engineer wanted us to reproduce every single hearing device that the child was doing, so the signal processing of every single device, so the children could have perfect localization opportunities. But this would have been, first of all, an enormous project. And also it's a bit beyond the scope of this project, because here, but first of all, they were all receiving the sound through the speakers of the head-mounted display, which are not very high quality. But the main part of this project was not a precise sound localization, was more awareness of where a sound was coming from, and also how to match it with a visual element in an experience which was quite dynamic. So one point to take into consideration is also how accurate should the simulations of this virtual reality environment be in order for them to be useful as training. And before I leave the word to Razvan, so yeah, this would be the question. How much can we tolerate a discrepancy between what we see and what we hear? I want to show you an example where actually we could not tolerate the discrepancy. So this is another example of audiovisual localization. This was for elderly musicians who get a cochlear implant, this time later in life. So these musicians, they would like to go to concerts, they would like to play, but they have a very hard time recognizing in a band which instrument is which. So we were thinking if they could train with where they first listen to one instrument separate and they see which instrument it is. And then once they start to be mixed together, hopefully they will learn to recognize the instruments. In this case, we did it with the HoloLens, which is this device that is augmented reality. So you see both the virtual world, but it's augmented through the physical world. Because again, talking to the musicians, they said that they don't like to be completely immersed like children. They don't like to be completely immersed in the virtual world and not be able to see the physiotherapist or the real world. But one of the problems of this device, of the HoloLens, is calibration. So here, this is like the graphical user interface of the clinicians, that they could move around the instrument in space on a 2D tablets, and then the musician could see and hear the instrument at the specific location. But since this device requires really a long calibration time, we had many times the situation where the instrument and the sound and its visual were very much dislocated. And this created more confusion than usefulness. So there is still some work to do to understand how much discrepancies. And this is, so this is just one of the musicians. Maybe I can show you the video of, so the musicians looks around. Now it's without sound, but so this person is the physiotherapist. She's moving the instruments in space, and then the person sees them coming closer or going far away in augmented reality. And the sound matches the position while the calibration is effective. So, and we all know the ventriloquism effect, right? That it works as an effect, but how much, when doesn't it work? And especially in augmented reality, when don't we get this visual capturing? Still, there is some work that could be done to have a better understanding of, depending on different hearing abilities, how much discrepancy there should be between audition and vision in order for them, for vision, in this case, to capture audition. So maybe now, yes, now, Razvan, if you want, I can mute myself and you can keep going. And
you're gonna just press next, or should I take over the slides?
sorry, I can press next. Just tell me. Yeah.
All right, I'll press next. Hi, my name is Razvan, and right now I'm a postdoc in the Multisensory Experience Lab, and I feel like I've met some of you at some point in the last few years. And my research that I'm going to show you now is mostly my work that I've done during my PhD, which focused on augmenting the music listening experience with vibrotactile stimulation. And my focus group was predominantly people with cochlear implants, adults with cochlear implants. And as you can see in the second and third picture, they usually are also old. My work kind of revolved around building concert furniture and evaluating concert furniture in different iterations and different scenarios. And together with Jesper from the Royal Academy, organizing concerts to support this, or maybe to present these concert furnitures and also to evaluate them. This is one part of the work. Another part of the work focuses more on music training, but I'll probably get to that. Next. All right, so a quick introduction to the timeline. This is what we've been doing. We had our first introduction to the realm of CI music in 2021, where we organized like a workshop concert, and then we had a few more concerts. Between concerts 2 and 3, Jesper predominantly developed a music training system for at-home training, which implied some sort of, I have a feeling if you press next, it's going to be on the next slide. Oh no, this is the first workshop, and then yeah, there's no pictures of this is the first concert, and throughout those concerts, in between those concerts, we had this music training at home, which was on a Bluetooth speaker, a podcast style music teaching or music pedagogy lecture, if you'd like. I think Jesper summarized it very nicely, that the goal would be that the users, when I say users, I mean CI users, they just sit back, relax for 15 minutes and listen to a little bit about their favorite music. And we selected 3 songs that we set some criteria based on literature, what criteria those songs should have. And one of the last songs was by public request through voting. So when we started the project, we provided some options for the users. They voted their favorite song. That would be the song number 4 in our training scheme protocol. So they were choosing one song. It ended up being 2 Danish songs and 2 international songs. Imagine by Beatles, What a Wonderful World, and 2 Danish songs that are popular for this demographic. All right, next, I guess. Yeah, this is more pictures from our concerts. And if you can see that in the previous, can you go back one slide? One thing that we have consistently been observing is more and more people are coming to these concerts. We started with 4 or 5 and then their family, and now we can fill up a hall with hearing impaired and cochlear implant users. And I think Jesper is fantastic at making them feel welcomed and part of this community that we're trying to build around organizing concerts for music with hearing impairment. And also the music that we play follows the same criteria that we try to identify for the training. So it should be very simple, it should be very vocal centric, it should be familiar, some of you who work with music and CI know that there's some specific requirements that make music feel a bit better than others. All right. As part of our results, what we found is that, yeah, this is the concert furniture. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the concert furniture. Whoop, whoop. We went a little too far. This one is fine. Maybe the one when we can see the benches. This one's also fine. So it's composed of a two-part system, one with the kind of like an angled bench and a similar footrest. So it's a double slanted system and we mic'd the bass, the double bass from the stage through the footrest and the vocal through the benches. And the idea of this double slanted system is that you cannot sit on it and you cannot stand on it either. So you have to kind of find your own comfortable position. I call it like analog mixing, which is like as analog as it can be, that if you want more bass, you just lean forward. If it's too much stimulation on your feet, you just lean backwards or you take a foot down. And you can see some users are using their hands as well to feel the vibrations. And of course, there's a little bit of signal processing to emphasize the vibrotactile stimulation. And the idea is that the drums play through the acoustic or electroacoustic channel. And the assumption is that even if the timbre of the drums is not correctly understood, then the role of the drums will be, and we know that from literature. So the timekeeping and the pulsating effect of the drums is more or less unaffected by the implantation. And then we wanted to augment the voice, which is the most important part according to literature, and the bass because it's something that we know that CI users really lack. So we try to use a small number of actuators to focus on the two most important aspects of music with CI listening experience. All right. And we evaluated those in some concerts. We even took them out at Roskilde Festival, which is a 100,000 people festival in a city close to Copenhagen. And they ran for 4 days nonstop, and somehow they didn't break. Unfortunately, it was not such a good opportunity for research, even though maybe I thought it will be. It's hard to find cochlear implant users in 100,000 people. Everything is just pure chaos, pretty much. So I think for next iterations this summer, we'll probably gonna look at festivals or venues that are smaller and we have a bit more control. Not so much on the music, but more on the traffic. Anyway, they were very well received by the people who sat at them, but none of them were cochlear implant users. All right. I think if we move to this is the training system that I was talking about earlier. Everybody got a Bluetooth speaker and some people got a tactile display. I call it the VAM, also known as the pig potato. So all participants had one of those set up at home and they all listened to this training training lectures that we've been talking. If we go to the next slide, I can show you some results. This is so during those concerts, we evaluated the performance of the CI and hearing aid users and basically everybody in the audience, regardless of the hearing profile, with a melodic contour identification evaluation. And I'm going to say MCI from now on, melodic contour identification. MCI is a quite common music evaluation tool in the CI world because it's a little bit, I want to say the middle road, but it's a bit better than pitch discrimination. So just a two-note discrimination, which one's higher, which one lower. And it can encapsulate a little bit of music in it. And Jesper composed the melodies to follow the natural progression or the common progression in Western music. So there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And yes, they were very short melodies, but at least there were melodies with some meaning and not random melodies. As part of this research, we tried to solidify some definitions for what a contour is, and we proposed our own definition. And along these definitions, there's also the melodies that Jesper composed, and those are freely available if anybody would like to continue doing this MCI and does not want to compose 48 melodies with 4 contours. I think what set us apart from all the other MCI tests we did before was the fact that we put it in a concert scenario. So we kind of gave up or gave away a lot of control, and we traded for ecological validity, because one thing is to listen to music in an anechoic scenario, and then you'll have perfect listening conditions. And but that's never going to be the case for a CI user. So I think our interest was more to how can we or how to understand the concert experience, which implies coming with a friend, implies getting a seat that you might not want to because you were there 5 minutes too late, implies looking at the musicians, staying too far away from the bass player, too close to the piano, too far to back. So all these, while we are very aware, and it was a very conscious decision that we cannot have control of those factors, but I think the overall experience is a lot more relevant, and the data that we get from it is a lot more, it correlates better with what a real musical experience would be. Anyway, these are the results. What you see here, we in the end we only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 participants that were in the first concert and the second concert and did the training and completed the training. We had some more that signed up for the training, but they couldn't make it to the second concert, pretty much. Well, we can see that everybody has improved to some degree, some more than others. And what is interesting to find in this graph is that regardless of the hearing profile, the improvement is more or less the same. And this is a little bit of a what's that word? I cannot find the word. It starts with C. It's something that we have not expected from literature. We were expecting to find that people with hearing aid would improve the least, and people with the cochlear implant would improve the most, or bimodal users would improve the most. But we have not found that, and this is also a little bit reflected in the independent analysis of the MCI performance, that in both concerts, most participants with some sort of hearing impairment performed more or less equal. There's no difference in our scenarios. There's no difference between hearing profile. Some instruments are better than others. For example, piano is the easiest to recognize when it's a solo. Piano with a bass is the second easiest. Accordion is pretty difficult, and accordion and bass is very difficult. So we also have this discussion about the impact of masker into a melodic contour identification test. But these are all published, so if you're interested, we can probably read the whole paper. But I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of our concerts and our vibrating furniture, and a little bit of evaluation that we did. And I think I'll pass it to Francesco.
Francesco, yes, thank you, Razvan.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Francesco. I'm a PhD student in the Multisensory Experience Lab. So I will try to briefly show you a bunch of different projects that I have been working on, or I'm working on right now. This was kind of like a bridge between my master thesis and the beginning of my PhD, and I think somehow connects well with what Razvan presented so far. So this is a haptic cover for smartphones. And the whole idea is to provide high quality vibrotactile feedback while using smartphone devices. So you might wonder why developing something like this when all smartphones are kind of capable of giving some sort of vibrotactile feedback? And the answer is that that kind of vibrotactile feedback usually it's quite low in quality. Because of the technology that is used and technical constraints, the devices are just using one single frequency, while in here we have voice coils mounted inside the handles, and this allows to actually provide a very wide range of frequencies and have a good control on them. If you can go to the next, please. Yeah, so to kind of evaluate a bit the device and also mappings, we developed a very simple MCI, melodic contour identification task, where we used 4 different instruments and asked to 15 normal hearing participants to perform this task. The task was also like the sound was also accompanied kind of like provided together with haptic conditions, and the users were listening to the sounds using headphones, and the sound was processed with a cochlear implant simulator. We know that that is an approximation, of course. It's not like how actually music is really perceived by CI users. Actually, we don't exactly know how it sounds, right? But still, that was kind of like for the sake of the experiment. So we can see here that basically from the data, we saw that the amplitude modulation applied to the fundamental frequency of the melodies was the one that helped the most to actually guide the participants to answer correctly to the contour identification task, followed by the full audio, and then the vibration was for the third condition was not present. And of course, all these mappings were randomized. Thank you. Can you? Yeah. This is a second project that I wanted to show you, and it's a very simple video game based on memory card games. So basically you just tap on the card, but instead of looking at the card, you actually listen to a sound, and you have to match the correct pairs of instruments that are actually playing. The interaction was done using a DualSense controller. And yet again, because in here Sony is using the same kind of technology for actuators that is the voice coil, and also here you can get a very good quality vibration. I guess there is a video that shows the implementation, but yet again, it's very, very simple. I don't know if it's even the sound is, yeah, there is no sound, but you just press, you listen to the sound, and once you find the correct pair, the card is gonna flip, and you actually see what instrument was. Next, please. So, of course, the hypothesis was to have a training that would some kind of like improve the performance of the child. This is, of course, a game for children. We managed to test the prototype only with one participant that has auditory neuropathy, and this is a condition that prevents the auditory nerve to fire correctly the electrical stimuli coming from cochlear implants. The participant trained for 2 weeks at home with the parents' supervision. So here again, we tried to kind of give the privilege of kind of focus more, let's say, on the ecological validity more than the scientific rigor. We tested the perception of timbre capabilities of the child at the beginning and the end of the training. Next, please. Yeah, here I reported quickly the results, and we can see that the participant played 19 sessions, and we didn't really see any improvement or significant differences between the vibration contribution. as you can see, they were randomized, and the same level was presented twice with the different mappings with vibration or not vibration. And yeah, we don't really know how the child performed the training. Of course, the child was at home with the parents, so we didn't really know what happened, and we are also considering that maybe the training was too short. Most likely also the interaction became boring for the child, and this is also what we want to improve in the next iterations. Stefania, if you go to the next, please. Because the idea is to develop a new version of the game where we try to improve the engagement, so make the game more complex and more fun, hopefully, to kind of avoid boredom and extend the training period. For the very last project, I want to show you sound cubes, and this is a quite different topic. The idea is to have these cubes that can be displaced around the children to train sound localization. The cubes are connected through Wi-Fi, and the clinician or the parents can activate one of the cubes, selecting through their smartphone and using the interface that I reported here, choose a song and play the sound stimulus. The child has to identify which cube is actually playing the music and pick up the cube. In this way, the cube detects the movement and gives a positive or a negative feedback accordingly to the answer. So the system is quite simple, but if you can go to the next slide, please. We are trying to make something that is applicable both at home and in the clinic, and the interaction is quite fun. As I said, the system provides auditory feedback, and it's quite scalable as well, because there are up to 9 cubes that can be connected simultaneously. And of course, the higher the number of cubes, the more difficult the task is. Right now, we are trying this prototype in the clinic and at home. We ran some pilot testing in the clinic, and currently I think 2 children are trying the system at home. So we will see what is gonna come out. I think I'm done for the part, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco. I would like to leave some time for questions, so maybe I skip this next topic. And just to conclude, so nowadays, auditory displays, both software and hardware-wise, especially for virtual and augmented reality, they are becoming more and more accessible and portable. So we really like to take technologies, either build them so they can be taken out of the lab or using custom-made, but we are very interested in running tests outside laboratory settings, as you could see from our projects. And so out of this space and creating both software and hardware solutions, which are more usable. But our main challenge, as you can imagine, is the fact that we are addressing a diverse population. So they all have different tastes. They all have different skills, both physical and mental. So how can we design in such a way that we can fit all the skills, and of course, given our the time that we have available? And so also, as I mentioned, it's very important for us to talk to the children, talk to the stakeholders, and listen their needs. So we like to create the technologies, but we need the end users always in the loop. And also, what and how can we measure? So there is this pretty old but still valuable graph from the book Perceptual Audio Evaluation from Soren Beck and Nick Zakharov. So we know well, this is more in auditory perception, we know how to measure physical elements like placement of loudspeaker and so on. And also we are pretty good in the perceptual domain, but still, I think it's still a challenge to understand the cognitive and affective domain. So how can we understand the quality of the experience, the engagement, and also the effectiveness of this training. So our challenges are still, I would say, in this term, both in recruiting participants, because obviously running tests in laboratory settings with our students is much easier than taking technologies out and engaging the population to engage in this test, but also how to assess that our technologies are valuable. And I think, yeah, I would like, as I said, I would like to leave some time for questions. So I think I leave it like this.
Thank you so much, Stefania, and also thanks to Francesco and Razvan for this very interesting and inspiring talk with lots of ideas for how to augment music. So really very interesting. We already have a question. So the protocol is just type your question in the chat if you like, or raise your hand, and then you can use your microphone and camera if you wish to raise your question. So first in line is Beth Biederman.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. This was very interesting and I appreciate it. Apologies for having my camera off, but I'm in Toronto, still eating my breakfast in my bathroom. So I am a fairly competent cochlear implant user who's been deaf since childhood. And I have a question for you that may be an old hackneyed question that you've answered before or addressed already, but I don't know about how you've addressed it. And that is, I enjoy classical music, but I would like to be able to identify repetitions in melodies with more competence, because I find that if someone long time deafened, I have a very poor auditory memory. It may be better than it was before I got a cochlear implant, but it's still not great. There seems to be a part of my brain that didn't develop very well as a child. So I may hear a theme, or for that matter, a word, and a few minutes later hear it again and not realize that it's been repeated. And that's behind some of my mispronunciations, and it's behind some of my lack of appreciation, better appreciation of classical music. So I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in a game. I'm not interested in a program. What I'd like is something that I could use while I'm listening to classical music that could help me to identify repetitions in the theme, because my understanding is that hearing people get a lot of appreciation from that. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good point also about, we ran actually a workshop before creating these concerts that where we had actually many games and also some musical experiences. And also actually we noticed it's a bit of a stereotype, but mostly the children were interested in the gamified experience, while the adults, they were more interested in better exposure to music. I have to say, we didn't work with the training music memory, but that would be a very interesting next step, or a parallel step, I would say, because we are definitely not done with the training just these simpler musical parameters. But that is definitely something. So there are studies with investigating other elements of memory, maybe not in musical context so much for hearing impaired, but or that I know at least. But that's definitely a very good, very good suggestion.
Can I add a few words?
Of course, yeah.
So hello everyone, I'm Jesper Andersen, so I'm also with the team from Aalborg and working on my PhD to do music training for hearing impaired, like Razvan talked about. And just to talk about your question, one of the things that we have been training in the recent home training program we have been doing with the 110 participants doing home training is also music structure. So not only the vertical layers of different instruments and instrument recognition, but also the other way around, to listen to the structure of a song. And this has been not for classical music, but in pop music, where we have a lot of repetitions. So it was very helpful for some participants to hear the same segment you said a few minutes later, but actually just a few seconds later, to learn to recognize how does the beginning of a chorus of a pop song sound. Hear it once more, and get a quick repetitions, and then hear it in the whole context once again. So that was helpful. That is what we have been doing in the training, not for classical music, but yeah, it could be adapted to classical music listening as well. And then maybe it could be an idea also to focus on some, especially Baroque classical music or early music where there are a lot of repetitions, and then train how to recognize those different elements. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Nick in the chat, and this question is asking regarding the term visuospatial. And Nick says that this turned out to be quite mistaken, as visually impaired people often have heightened spatial cognition with a strong auditory basis. So what is the situation with audiospatial, quote unquote? Do hearing impaired people tend to have compromised spatial cognition or heightened spatial cognition with a strong visual basis? So this is a question regarding the multisensory integration, folks.
It actually really depends. For example, in the our colleagues at the hospital, they really don't appreciate focus on using visual to train auditory, because they are really afraid, especially for children, that they would be overtaken, the visual stimuli would overtake the auditory one. So instead of improving their auditory skills, the visual would take over. So it really depends on the level of, so when you got your hearing impairment, and also how much, for example, in the hospital, they do a lot of what is called auditory verbal training therapy, where actually they really focus not on improving the visual competencies, but pushing the auditory competence. And as I mentioned, they are reached very good results, but still there are some improvements. So it's hard, again, it's like with everything, actually, it's very hard to generalize on like, I hope I answered your question.
I can add a little bit, just one second, but I think they're both. And what Stefania is trying to say, that we're trying to not focus on. So yes, they do have a heightened spatial awareness with a visual bias, and also a compromised auditory spatial bias, spatial awareness. So it is a little bit of both, and but both can be improved with training.
Okay, we have ongoing discussion about this in the chat, which is nice. I do have another question or two to Razvan and Francesco. And those two questions refer to the timbre perception test you mentioned. And I would be interested whether you could give us some more information about what kind of test that was. And also, Razvan, you mentioned that I think you said a little bit of signal processing to emphasize the vibration. And I would be curious if you would tell us a bit more about your secrets in that respect.
Should I go? I was actually quickly looking for the paper because it's the timbre perception test. Yeah, this one was a test that has been implemented by Lee, and it was, I think, a max patch, simple max patch for the ones that are familiar with the Max software. But basically, they were trying to find like a standardized way of assessing the capabilities of recognizing different aspects of the timbre. So I think they were manipulating envelope, the spectral flux, and the spectral centroid of the synthesized sounds. So you had a very simple interface. You were listening to the kind of like sample A, and then you had to match the sample B using a slider, and the slider was affecting one of these three parameters that I just said. So the envelope, the spectral flux, or the spectral centroid of the stimulus. So this paradigm and this kind of a test has been developed for a normal hearing population. So what we have done, we basically made a variance of this test, making more wide and obvious kind of changes on the sound stimuli, so to have a kind of more obvious difference in between the various blocks of the test. And if you want, I can actually also put in the chat the reference of the paper for the ones that are interested in.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cool.
All right, then I'll take over. So the quest for finding a good audio to tactile mapping has been it's something that we've been doing for a few years now, and I think our results, we run some experiments, and it's also published. If anyone's interested, I can share that. There is no proposed audio to tactile mapping system that performs better than others, and we compared two existing ones from the literature and one that we proposed ourselves. So what we ended up doing is a bit analog to how a sound check would go in the audio domain. We let the band play, and we adjusted pretty much dynamic processors, so one or two compressors, and some EQing while staying on the bench and the band was playing. So I will not be able to tell you how much you should what the attack rate should be of your compressor, and what compressor ratio, so on, because it was something done as a sound check, or like a vibro check, if you'd like. I can tell you a little bit about the things that we wanted to preserve as a thought process behind it. We wanted to emphasize transients. So if there would be any sort of compression, the compression would have some sort of attack that would not kill transients. Try to focus around the frequency of the target signal, so the voice would be fairly high passed, just in case if there's any residual noise, low frequency noise from other instruments would be removed. But basically this, emphasize whatever the target signal is with EQing, and do some sort of compression or dynamic processing to make sure that the transients are preserved and the sound or the signal is also preserved. So this resulted in usually two compressors, one on the input, one on the output. The one in the input, a very aggressive compressor, and the one on the output, a bit more mild one. Yeah, there's another paper from our colleagues from DTU, and especially Scott Aker, who run some investigations in the timbre perception and other factors that are important in the music perception and tactile music perception. And his results are saying that basically nothing really matters except rhythm and amplitude. So as long as those are preserved and accentuated, then the mapping should be functional.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. For the sake of time, I think we need to stop now here, but let's thank all the speakers again. Thanks a lot. Perhaps we can have some virtual reactions here.
Thank you.
We also have some open questions in the chat, but for the sake of time, we need to go on now. But I would encourage our trio to answer these questions and to do a parallel processing type of discussion here in the chat. I think this would be interesting. And now I hand over to Alinka.
Thank you, Kai. So I want to introduce the second, the fourth now of our speakers today. That's Ellie Harding. Ellie's a postdoctoral researcher in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Groningen, having studied and worked at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences. She has expertise in interdisciplinary research in the areas of language and music cognition, speech perception, emotion perception, and hearing loss and cochlear implants. She's been working on projects such as SimuGame, which seeks to improve cochlear implant users' hearing and quality of life through piano playing and serious gaming, and also has been involved in the SingWell project, which is exploring the impact of singing for supporting well-being and communication. Today, she'll be talking about the potential of musical training to stimulate neuroplasticity in cochlear implant users and older adults with hearing loss. Thank you very much, Ellie. We're looking forward to your talk. If you want to share your screen, bring up your slides, take it away.
Thank you, Alinka. Can everyone see my slides?
We can't at the moment.
It says that I'm screen sharing.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
As well.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep, carry on. I can't for some reason, but that's, oh no, I can now. That's fine. Thank you. Right.
All right. Great. Okay, so I will be talking indeed about rehabilitative effects of musical training. The first part is for a study that we just completed this year with cochlear implant users. And the second part is a new study since I've joined a different lab. And we're adding a second language learning as a training for older adults with hearing loss. All right, so this is the team for the first project. We're at the Speech Perception Lab of Dennis Boschkent here. And we implemented a new piano training for cochlear implant users. I'm going to try to play some audio examples. Hopefully it will work. But in general, cochlear implant users, due to the limitations of electric hearing, have difficulty hearing both music and speech in background noise, such as other speech. So here's an example of piano melody. All right, could everyone hear that? A little bit. Okay. Well, I'll just proceed as if it's okay. Maybe someone can flag me if something is really off. And here's a simulation of that same melody with cochlear implanted hearing.
Ellie, I think the examples are going through your loudspeakers as far as I can tell. So perhaps if you can share again and then select that you also share the computer audio.
Oh, actually, I'd rather just not do it because it's fine.
Okay.
All right. So in general, it sounds like noise, both for music and speech on speech, because it's missing the fine grained pitch information that we can hear from the full acoustic signal. So we wanted to know whether training in one domain, in the music domain, can transfer to help improve perception in the other domain, so speech, and why, or what does that look like? Sorry, it's still in Dutch, this slide. So music making can have a near transfer effect, meaning that the skills and the areas that you train from the music that you're making can have either a near transfer effect for other types of music perception, or, for example, a far transfer effect to the domain of speech or to speech on speech. And in particular, motor areas of the brain and auditory areas of the brain are trained in music and can transfer to speech. And for this particular study, we focused on the dorsal network as an informative way to shape the method of the training, of the piano training. So there was a study from 2010 where cochlear implant candidates who were not yet implanted did rhyming task in the scanner. And it was found that after they were implanted and there was a 6-month follow-up and checking the outcomes of their speech, those who had dorsal network activation during that task in the scanner had better speech outcomes than other people who had ventral activation in that same task. So we know that the dorsal network is relevant for cochlear implant speech outcomes. It's also relevant for speech prosody perception. So the difference between no, dogs are here, and no, dogs are here. Also, the mapping of sounds to phonemes involves the dorsal network and motor areas. So this is relevant because it's actually possible to train the dorsal network with music, and that is by using improvisation in the music making. There was a study from 2015 by Harris and de Jong, where if you look on the left, when comparing musicians to non-musicians, and the task was to listen to music and imagine playing along. Musicians had more dorsal network activation than non-musicians, which is to be expected. But then improvising musicians, so organists who professionally only get general chord information, and then it's their job to improvise the actual surface structure of the music while they're playing, they had a lot more dorsal activation than musicians that didn't have improvisation. So the person who conducted the study, Robert Harris, he was also a piano teacher at the conservatory, and this combined with his own anecdotal observations of students who were better at improvising had kind of more sensitive musicality, and it seemed to make a difference. So he created the guided audiomotor exploration piano method. And you have musical building blocks, so learning things like intervals and arpeggios, and then the lesson combines these into musical games. So it's without sheet music, and black keys are also, so black tonal keys like E flat and A flat are used as well to facilitate that it's easy to touch the right keys when you're playing. And in a nutshell, this worked. So our cochlear implant users, we had 10 of them doing this study, doing the piano group. They learned how to play the piano. So the study design for this was that we had of course, the piano training group, and we had a passive control group, but we also had an active control group that learned to play Minecraft. And they had this a similar setup of lessons every week. So also it was quite tightly matched for the format of the lessons as well. And I can go into more about that if you want. And it continued for 6 months. So people either did 6 months of the new piano method or 6 months of learning Minecraft. And our piano primary outcome.
Show the dog where the red one is.
Okay, was the coordinate response measure. And the video that just played said, show the dog where the red 3 is. And then it's the job of the participant to click on the red 3. We had other secondary outcomes for speech perception, such as a gender identification of voice and vocal emotion. And also we had 5 other music perception tests. So looking at the testing session before training and after training, we found that there was a strong effect of the piano training on the speech-on-speech test. So if you can see in the purple here, this is the post-session minus the first session, so 0 is no difference. And the control group was not had no improvement, The Minecraft group had marginal improvement, and the piano group had significant improvement. And what you're seeing here on the right is a Bayesian sequential analysis showing that our effect was very strong for the amount of participants that we had. And this is a control as the reference group. This is looking at it not just pre-post. So our main question was whether the 6 months of training can improve, but we also looked at across these different sessions of before, during the training, after the training, and a 3-month follow-up. And we found that this was less of a strong effect. So it was no longer strong with the sequential analysis, but so you can see the piano was on the rightmost in purple. We have a dip again after they stopped. The speech scores actually went back towards baseline again. And in the Minecraft continued to go up, but this was actually driven by one person who I will mention in the discussion. He loved Minecraft and kept playing it like 10, 20 hours a week. And this person ended up also getting it installed on their own personal laptop and not just our laptop from the study. So that was a really interesting thing. But without this kind of star improvement, the Minecraft did not improve compared to baseline at follow-up. And the control group showed no difference. So that's nice that we had no test-retest effect from the coordinate response measure. So we can say that with this particular piano method, music does work as hearing rehabilitation for cochlear implant users as a proof of concept. We had 6 months of training, which is longer than most studies. It was also logistically heroic to conduct this study, I have to say. We also saw from looking at the follow-up test session that the musical training, the effects start to diminish after it's stopped, which makes sense. So the idea is to just keep doing it. Also, these were all people who were non-musicians and didn't play Minecraft before they started the study either. And then only doing something for 6 months without having previous experiences may be also part of why it stopped after the follow-up. So maybe if we had a group of people who were previously musically active or something, the effects might stay longer. Indeed, speech on speech was approved. And interestingly, the cochlear implant users could learn to play the piano and also quite well. We currently do not have videos that we're allowed to share, but I think some of the music, it sounded really nice, the music that I heard them play. We did note from feedback from the participants that they didn't appreciate that they had to have a piano in their home because it's quite large, a piano, and we organized for an electric piano to be in their home, but it's still, you have to find a place for it. Also, some of our older adults had issues with dexterity and arthritis. I think that I'm kind of zipping through this and I have time to talk about some anecdotes. So this Minecraft star I mentioned, it was really nice because actually most of the people in the Minecraft group didn't like Minecraft except for 2. And this person was the star, and actually it became a nice way for him to relate to his grandson who also played Minecraft. And indeed, with his many hours that he put into it, we could show improvement. So motivation is maybe a very large factor in this kind of training, especially if we're trying to stimulate neuroplasticity. And maybe that's something to look at more closely, because we're all interested in music research, and a lot of people like music and are motivated to engage in music. So maybe it's this motivation rather than just the music per se that is influencing positive outcomes. Also, just participating in the study was good for confidence, which I think is nice to hear that in general, research itself can have a nice impact. This was one particular person who used to be professionally very successful and then lost his hearing and didn't participate in social things anymore. But he felt that just by doing the tests, it made him confront his own hearing differently. And he felt more comfortable to tell people that he needed them to speak up and things like that. So it was nice to see that participation just in general for the control group also brought something to him. And I had two people in the piano group also mention some anecdotal things about their own social interactions improving. So one person didn't hesitate to make a phone call and ask for someone to come and repair her boiler. And she said that before she had done the study, she wouldn't have done that. She would have gone to her neighbor to ask for someone to help her make a phone call. And then another person found that they were no longer avoiding people at their golf club, that they found that they're more willing to try to engage in conversations and then just say, oh, I can't understand you, I'm sorry, and then leave instead of just completely avoiding it. So that was also nice to hear. These points have led to some new research questions that I'm now addressing in the next study. So music as hearing rehabilitation for cochlear implant users. Is it also helpful for a milder and more oftenly or more prevalently occurring hearing conditions such as just mild or moderate hearing loss? Also, speech-on-speech was improved, and we have our hypotheses for this being driven by dorsal network neuroplastic changes. But could there also be some general cognitive improvement that's happening due to this new skill learning? Also, regarding the sort of caveats of having a piano and needing dexterous fingers, what does that mean for older adults? Would it be better for older adults if they had something that's not going to require them to have dexterous fingers like singing? And so then we're taking these questions in stride and addressing them in the next study. Musical activities and language learning in older adults with hearing loss. And then our primary outcomes for this study are cognitive function and psychosocial well-being. So now I'm in the lab of Miro Kaiser, who's right here. And it's the bilingualism and aging lab. So when I was finishing up the cochlear implant study, in her lab, 2 PhD students were finishing up another study where they found that learning to play guitar and learning English both helped actually improve cognitive function on a particular task called the color shape switching task. And so that's a large driver for the setup of the current study. But in general, just reminding you that around 30% of people are aged 60 and above. So it's a large part of our population, and it makes sense to start to focus research on this population. Also, psychosocial well-being and cognitive function can be improved if you look at people who had a lifetime of multilingualism or musical activities. We found this in our lab in a retrospective study. And what I just mentioned, a training study just showed that English lessons and guitar lessons also can improve cognitive function, psychosocial well-being in older adults. And in especially in this training study, people with hearing loss were excluded from the study, but that is not so great because older adults who have hearing loss have a higher risk of reduced cognitive function and reduced psychosocial well-being. So what we want to do in this study is see whether multilingualism, so learning a second language and participating in music can prospectively improve cognitive function and psychosocial well-being in older adults with hearing loss. This is indeed inspired by the Singwell project. So what we're doing is we're participating in the Singwell project, and they have quite a strict inclusion criteria. And we are going to use our local site to include what we collect for the Singwell project, but then have a broader inclusion criteria and fold that into the larger study. So we're asking whether music and language activities have advantages, as I just said, and speech on speech, which we just did with the cochlear implant users, that is a secondary outcome. So we're doing the same exact measure for this group. And then for the musical activity, it's going to be a choir. So using the structure that we're setting up for Singwell. And for our language learning, what we're going to be using is sign language. And this is not, at first when Meryl Kaiser suggested this, I thought, oh, that's a little on the nose, like you have hearing loss, so just start learning sign language now. But that's not why we're doing it. We want to just look at the cognitive effects of language learning. And then if we have people with different degrees of hearing loss, that will be hard to tease apart if some people have worse outcomes from language learning. So it's a prospective design with 60 plus years and older. Mild to moderate hearing loss, so at least 20 decibel hearing loss in both ears. And untreated people will be in the Singwell only group. And then we're also including people with hearing aids in our larger study. It's quite long, so it's 1 year. We're having testing every 3 months, and then there's a control group who just participate in the testing. And then we'll have 2 training groups to test for order effects, but each group will participate in both choir and sign language with an on-off scheme. So before, after testing and a follow-up with either choir or sign language, and then a break, and then before, after testing and a follow-up. And the follow-up of the first activity serves as the baseline for the second. Our primary outcome is the color shape switching task. And I just mentioned that this was found in the study, these 2 PhD students, Floor van der Ploeg and Jelle Brouwer. You see shapes, and then the task is to either identify the color or the shape. And then switching back and forth and mixing up the tasks is a measure of cognitive flexibility. We'll also use semi-structured interviews as our primary outcome for the psychosocial well-being. We have other cognitive tests and psychosocial questionnaires as our secondary outcomes. We also are doing other speech hearing rehabilitation and music perception tests and questionnaires. This is scheduled to start on March 11th of this coming year. So that's great. We've got a choir director, and we're starting with the choir. So that's looking forward to that. In some musical training, so with a new piano method, can improve speech-on-speech perception in cochlear implant users. And next, we will investigate whether musical training and learning a second language can more generally improve cognitive function and psychosocial well-being. And then this group will be older adults with hearing loss. Thank you very much for your attention. And thanks also to Chi Lo for coordinating the Singwell project at the Toronto Metropolitan University.
Thanks so much, Ellie. Really interesting projects there, and you know, very, very best of luck with the one that you're starting in March. I've got I can't see any questions in the chat just now, so I've got a few if you don't mind, and kind of taking them chronologically. Oh, hang on, there are some questions, but I just wondered if there's one from Naomi we'll get to. With the Minecraft, and you'll have to forgive me because it's not a game that I play, is there a soundtrack to that? or is that just visual?
Right, so that's a good question. There are sounds. We had the music turned off. So it does have like a musical background that's different per section of the world that you enter. And this was intentionally turned off for the study. We did have, so we didn't turn off all of the sounds. So there still have like the sound of like walking, or the sound of zombies coming, or the sound of, I don't know, swishing and things like that. So it's true that maybe this marginal effect that we had is still like a sound sequence mapping that's happening, that's following the structure rules of the game. So it's true that we are not able to say whether that happened or not.
Okay, thank you. I guess it's always the case that you have to make decisions about what your control is, and you've done that also with the sign with the sign language, and presumably you're going to be controlling for prior singing experience and also prior exposure to the to sign language as well.
So actually, we're taking people who have different degrees of musical activity, and also people who are in other musical activities, with the idea that we're doing the before after of this particular activity, but we will of course measure it and then treat it as maybe something that can explain variability in the data. So we're going to do like the Goldsmith musicality, and we're also note who is doing what and look at it retrospectively.
Thank you. I do have another question, but I'm going to bring Kai on next because he's got one. So
yes, thanks, Ali. Very interesting talk. I was wondering regarding the piano project, whether you collected any secondary measures to sort of disentangle your speech and on-speech results perhaps a bit more. There's this Dubinsky study with Frank Russo also, for example, where they had pitch perception as a mediator involved in improved speech intelligibility scores. Did you collect something like that as well?
So do you mean to know what specifically about the sound was helping improve, like whether it was a pitch or things like that?
Yes, exactly. So speech perception is obviously a very complex collection of different auditory skills. So the question would be which one, or whether you can say whether any bundle of skills might be improving compared to others.
That's a good point. So we don't have enough first of all, thank you for your question. We don't have enough power to really look at that very well. So we have 30 people in the whole study, and then 10 people participate in the piano group. And then comparing, like looking at these very, very small numbers, and then looking at correlations across groups is not really trustworthy from a statistical point. But we had a test battery that also looked at F0 and VTL perception for speech, and our speech further had our conditions. It changed in the target to masker ratio in terms of intensity. So the target was harder to hear in the noise, but also we changed voice differences between the target and the masker speech. And we're going to look at this from over across the baseline, across the whole group, to maybe make some hypotheses for what it could be. But we also found that there's like the lower you start, the more you can improve. And we're going to try to tease apart like whether this was changes in voice differences, for example, or if it's just the intensity difference that where they improved. We also have the music perception tests. We had music emotion. Interestingly, that correlated with vocal emotion perception. But we also had melody, short-term, so pitch short-term memory. Maybe this will show something, but these kinds of looking across the different test outcomes for primary outcome and then secondary outcomes, what could be leading to what. We could only look at the baseline data when we have all 30 people.
Okay.
To see anything about that. But it's a very good question.
Okay.
Needs a follow-up research.
Yeah, it's about, there's always a choice that has to be made about the measures that you're using. Obviously, the design and the participant groups and the measures. I was interested in the measure of cognitive function. I don't know that one. That seems like a visual perception task. Could you just explain that one again? That color shaping switching.
Yes. So I actually, when I get back from holiday, the first thing I need to do is program this to get it ready. So I could tell you more in a couple of months. So the people receive, each trial has a shape that's presented, and then the task is either to say what the color is, or identify the color, or identify the shape. So, and then each trial is indicated what they have to do with this this task indicator. So the color wheel tells them that they have to identify the color, and then this circle, triangle, and square on top tells them that they have to identify the shape. And this switches back and forth either often or not, and then it's looking between the different like how well they switch between tasks. Is, for example, one of the outcomes of this test.
And is there normative data for that? I'm just wondering, perhaps that would be in the general population. Has anybody explored it specifically with people with hearing loss?
That's a good question. So it's the primary outcome of the study, the training study with the older adults who did not have hearing loss, and they did find that the guitar lessons and learning English improved this improved the score in this test. So but I have not looked into normative data for hearing loss, but that's a good point. And I'm thinking, like, once we get this study set up with participants recruited, etc. One thing I'd like to do is do some side general population testing that's not not part of the training study, to look at different hearing loss groups and things like that, to get some more baseline information.
Okay, and it might be interesting to know how long they've been, for example, sort of wearing hearing aids for as well. So how long they've been adjusting to their hearing loss overall.
Yeah, that's true. So we're expecting to be quite heterogeneous, but we will record this baseline characteristics of what their current audiogram says. So their average thresholds, hearing loss thresholds of 4 different frequencies, and indeed the hearing aid brand and how long they've been wearing it. There's also people wear their hearing aid for different numbers of hours per day. So that will also be something we have to take into consideration. I don't want to look at too many things, because then we'll run out of power again. But we are going to keep an eye on all of these things, and then if anything, see what can fuel hypotheses for future studies. If we find that something comes out of these little baseline differences.
Super. It's great to hear. I can't see any other questions in the chat, but if anybody there's a separate chat going on about that Naomi's introduced about hearing protection and playing in loud music environments with hearing aids and or cochlear implants. But if I may, I do just have one more question. You explained about quite briefly about the involvement of the dorsal network. I'm just interested, could you say something about the mechanisms through which the musical training does help with the speech perception? In terms of this, yeah.
So, okay, so I can to speak for the piano method that we set up. The idea is that improvisation is a large factor, and that we expect that more motor activity will be happening for like the extemporization, so the creative aspect of recombining and using those motor skills. Also, the fact that they didn't use a score means that we're not having visual motor integration, which can actually detract from audio motor integration. So it's that idea is that audio motor integration will be boosted by forcing them to really learn the motor first. And then the idea is that we're assuming that their motor system is intact, whereas the auditory system might be having some weakened pathways, for example, depending on how long they had auditory deprivation. And then by really tuning and strengthening the motor activity, we're trying to like harness the brain's natural inclination to have auditory motor integration, and then have it like the motor activity for the music kind of bootstrap the sound mapping to the different piano keys, for example. And we actually had a participant who said that at the beginning they couldn't hear the difference between two notes, or they couldn't hear if they made a mistake. But then at the end of the training, they could hear if they had hit a wrong note. So, I mean, we do have this kind of anecdotal response that it works. But I don't know. So like training the motor system and that it, motor areas are in the dorsal area. And then by forcing activity more dorsally, then this can also help with the strengthen areas that are involved in prosody perception, for example. And then what's part of speech on speech, if you're better able to hear like the prosodic changes between a speech stream, maybe this helps to better filter out the target as opposed to being confused, and if you're less able to follow one particular prosody contour, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Ellie. I can't see any other questions at the moment in the chat or any hands up. So perhaps we finish there. And just to say, a big thank you to you for sharing your work and wish you very well for the study that you're starting in March. I think we've got a few further comments in the chat. I don't know whether anybody wants to pick up on these at the end of the seminar today. This is to do with I'm just having a look here. Naomi, thank you for your contribution here.
Tremendously grateful to those who have responded. Thank you. It feels like possibly an interesting area, but thank you to those who did their presentations today as well. Very useful for me learning more about this.
So there are peak input limiters on hearing aids and also cochlear implants that should limit the potential for damage. But I see that Kirsten and Chris are coming back with some points. Sorry, I haven't been able to follow it all. I don't know if anybody wants to come on, either Chris or Kirsten, you want to come on and say a few words about this?
Yeah, sorry. So The question was to do with whether people with hearing aids or cochlear implants should be using hearing protection, which is kind of an interesting one. And I think the message is the devices themselves, even if the devices limit the sound, there might still be some residual hearing that could be damaged by direct sound coming not through the device, but just through the ears. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. But it's interesting. I don't know if anybody has any insights on this, but it's kind of an interesting question. Should people using these devices be also using earplugs in noisy environments?
Thanks, Chris. In the Hearing Aids for Music project, we found a lot that when there was a perception from the hearing aid user that the sound was too loud, that they would either use the hearing aid to sort of block some of that sound, or actually switch their hearing aids for hearing protection. But that tended to be more so in live settings, and the work that we did focused on music listening, so not music performance settings specifically. So it is a really interesting question. I don't know whether Kirsten...
I had a question. So sorry, I'm just catching up on.
Yeah, please go.
So the bimodal, about the question about bimodal hearing, does that question refer to when the hearing aid and the implant are in the same ear or different ears? Because you can have a hearing aid and a cochlear implant in the same ear.
So, I'm not sure who's answering that one. Chris, could you come on and give your thoughts on that?
Sorry, can you ask a question again?
Ellie?
What was the question? Sorry.
Could you ask your question again?
So it's about the question, Naomi Norton question about if the residual hearing can be damaged by exposure with hearing aid and cochlear implant. But my question is, do you mean when the hearing aid and the cochlear implant are in the same ear?
So this is actually, my kind of area of research is musicians health and wellness, so looking at protecting the hearing health of musicians. And within the orchestra I play with, we have a number of musicians who play with hearing aids. And we have been thinking a lot about hearing protection, some of those strategies being acoustic shields, and some of the other kind of things, but with a higher proportion of the amateur orchestra that I'm playing with using hearing aids than is necessarily common in professional orchestras at the moment, the guidelines for hearing protection don't seem to cover what should be done for those who are using hearing aids in particular. So it's hearing aids in my orchestra, and that might be in both ears or one ear. Sorry, so I don't have the technical terminology. I'm not an audiologist.
Yeah, I mean, if they got one good ear, then of course they should definitely put hearing protection in their good ear. You know, I've never heard of people using hearing protection in the ear that they have a hearing aid in. But the question is this question, it still might be a sensible thing to do if it's not too uncomfortable or whatever. But I mean, obviously, if it's an in the ear aid, then that's probably doing a lot of attenuation anyway. If it's behind the ear, then there still might be quite a lot of direct sound coming through, that isn't probably being processed by the hearing aid, but just coming straight through and could potentially cause damage. Yeah, it's really interesting point. I don't
really
know.
Helpful.
There might have been some research. I'm not aware of anybody who's looked into that, but it's I mean, there is the argument that you can only lose your outer hair cells once, right? So if you've got a moderate hearing loss, then you get that saturation effect with age, so that people who, if you've got a moderate noise-induced hearing loss, then the effects of age are less in terms of the overall reduction, or the overall dB threshold shift than there would be if they'd started off with normal hearing, because you can only lose your hair cells once. So you might get some of that going on. So you might be a little less vulnerable from that point of view. But yeah, it's for someone with a mild loss, so I'd have thought you'd want to use hearing protection as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah,
Chris, I can see Kirsten. I don't know whether you want to sort of come and say something, but also Neil, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Neil, as well. I don't know if you.
Can you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the hearing aid fittings are very individual. So some of them may be very, very, very open. So a lot of air can get through. So the potential for a lot of sound, which could be damaging to get through, is definitely there. So it really depends on the individual hearing aid fitting, because if it's very closed for more severe or profound hearing loss, then potentially you may get a bit of a protective effect. But hearing aids are fit with some sort of venting, some sort of open air ability, so you have good perception of your own voice, and also chewing and things like that are not so attenuated. I mean, to attenuate that. So if you push your ears, you get that funny feeling. So they're designed to be open. So it really depends on the individual. So if they're professional musicians, I would recommend they talk to their audiologist and potentially get some professional hearing protection. But again, it depends really on their loss, and it also depends on their instrument too.
Thank you, Neil. This is all very helpful.
Neil, what would those instrument-specific differences be? I mean, obviously for singers, the occlusion is an issue, and for woodwind players, with your experience.
When you think about strings, you think about timpani, you think about all the different instruments that there are, and all the different frequency responses and levels of these are. And you also think about brass players, they get a little bit of natural protection because of the Valsalva movement. I mean, it's all very, very individual. So I think this is where, as your work has shown, like Alinka, there's so many different musicians, different people, different listening, also where you are in regards to in the stage, where you are in the audience, where you are in the orchestra. I mean, if you've got a bunch of trumpet players behind you and you're a viola player, then yes, you're going to have to put something in. So it's very, very individual. It's very, very hard to make a sort of a general rule, but it's always, always, always important to protect hearing.
Thank you. It feels like a bringing together of kind of these different worlds as a point where we meet in the middle and maybe need to share some insights and guidance in particular. It feels like there's a lot that the musicians' health and wellness and performing arts medical worlds could learn from what is being done with those using cochlear implants and hearing aids for music. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Just to add a final point to that is that in the musicians hearing survey that I did, which was a collaboration with Help Musicians UK, the strongest predictor of the use of hearing protection among professional musicians was that it was painful, that they felt that it was too loud. So, as an absolute minimum, perhaps you should be saying to your orchestral members that if they feel like it's too loud, then they should be considering different options, perhaps. Andrew has put something in the chat. Not sure whether this is a question or not. Andrew says, if it seems to me if there are still hair cells that can be damaged, then there is always that potential. Speaking for myself, I sometimes use noise cancelling headphones worn over the hearing aids in noisy environments, then with a mini mic to feed a signal directly into my hearing aid. Okay, so that's that's one approach. I mean, Andrew, I don't know if you want to come on and say something.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that says it all, really. I find it's a constant sort of juggling of technologies to try and achieve a suitable hearing situation. And despite having all the massive hearing loss, I'm still very careful about protecting my hearing. But I can't work out whether that's just because being autistic, I've always sort of gravitated towards hearing protection anyway because of the heightened sensitivity, But musical situations, I really struggle, and that's why I haven't done much performing for many years because of the hearing loss and the impossibility of protecting my hearing adequately in that situation, and indeed of all the things that we've heard in these excellent presentations today. The ability to hear other musicians well is a big problem for me. But I don't know the actual answer to Naomi's question. It's a really interesting question. I do know someone who might, I'm thinking of Peter Ray, Alinka, who might be interested to give an answer on this. Peter, president of the otology section of the Royal Medical Association. So he presumably will have will at least have a view that will be well informed. So I can ask him.
Yeah, let's do that in the new year and see if we can get just it's helpful to have different perspectives.
Yeah.
So yeah. Does Alan, I can see that Alan's come on. Alan, do you want to come on and just say a few words as an audiologist specializing in practice for musicians?
Hi all, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Yes, so I thought I'd just appear in this last minute. It's a really good question, and I wrestle with all these variables in my clinic. I think the headline is, as I think Neil pointed out, that it's just very individual. Maybe one day we'll have kind of an algorithm that guides us to the best choice for each person. But I think what Andrew was nudging towards there, was almost hinting at, is kind of in-ear monitor type approach, because you want a particular frequency response, a particular level, but you want the attenuation of the external signal that may or may not be more or less useful. So yeah, so I guide musicians towards in-ear monitors if they're in the type of musical ensemble that would work with that. I think of a balancing act between how much to stimulate in terms of information, and we're going to be potentially squeezing that information through a narrowed bottleneck, depending on the type of hearing loss and the devices that you're using. But what's the information need? That might be a certain shape for timbre recognition. It might that might be also for feature extraction. So all this information stuff, and that would also be binaural as well. And then again, you're measuring that, you're balancing that against what we're colloquially thinking here as damage, but always bearing in mind that the damage that's happening is metabolic. I always remind or point out to musicians that these intensities are not ripping the basilar membrane, usually not ripping the basilar membrane, but they are causing damage that's accumulative. And I often bring up the UK government health and safety executive guidance, what are we kind of 80 dB for 8 hours, and show that kind of logarithmic effect of exposure, and then weighting that to do with, I think, what Chris pointed out there about, is it transient? Is it what's the exposure likely to be in that time window, and give something sensible about kind of a guidance for how long you could be exposed to that. So I'm saying a lot here, but how much exposure, how much dosage are you going to get in that time? And what do you need from it in terms of information? We want to block out the sounds that you really don't want. We want to provide the sounds that you do want. That's for your particular instrument, with the proximity that you're at to the other players, and do that in a way that keeps your dosage to a minimum. Kind of how much to protect and how much to stimulate. I tend not to recommend hearing aids for musical performances. They tend to be clipped on the input. I mean, I know that Marshall Chasing recommends, as a one option, to put some sticky tape over your input mics, just to get a linear attenuation, to drop it down so that as it comes in, it doesn't get clipped on the way in, so it's distorted. So that might be one little tip that I thought was cool from Marshall. But I tend not to recommend hearing aids, because the intensities we're talking about are very high, usually, and you can still get that information need met in terms of like a speech intelligibility index. If you remember, the speech banana that we see on an audiogram, how much of it do we need to hear to get the information we need to understand the speech? I imagine a music index, which is way down the audiogram, it's much more intense. And for that person, they might be able to get all the information they need with all the attenuation, even though their thresholds are increased. There we are, lots of waffle. Hope that's helpful to some degree.
That's really helpful, Alan. Thank you. It really does underline that it's a balancing act, and of course, for some those with more severe levels of loss, they're not in that luxurious position where they can choose to take them out. And actually, some work by Robert Fulford, done at the Royal Northern College of Music with musicians, showed that they were preferring to take them out where they could if there was milder levels of hearing loss for professional musicians. But it's not, it's not always the case that they can they can do that. But then it's, you know, what is the info that is needed for the musician as well, and that changes all the time and within pieces, isn't it? If depending on the repertoire and the instrument, and so it's yeah, it's a big challenge and a big balance. I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in with anything further on this. We'll have to close in a minute or two anyway. Kai, do you want to say a few words about the recent survey that's happened?
Well, I think everybody can just look at the paper if they like. Don't need to say many more words on that, but I just appreciate the discussion here, that we sort of got a very interesting new thread into the pool. And also I appreciate the wonderful presentations today by Ellie and Stefania and the team. So it was a very pleasurable session this afternoon, and hopefully we'll meet again next year.
Yeah, so just a few words on that. We've got talks coming up from Bastian, who is who leads Melodia, which is an online musical training tool, and Johanna Boyer, who is at Medell, and they're going to be talking about the effects of using this tool, the Melodia tool, to improve musical experience for cochlear implant users. So that's coming up in January. I think that's January the 22nd, yes. And the other announcement is that with Scott Bannister and Kai and some other editors, there's going to be a special issue of Music and Science, the journal Music and Science, on music and hearing loss. So we'll be putting out a call for papers in the new year that is going to run for the whole of the year, actually, and I'll be leading a team of editors on that. So that could be, if you could all start thinking about how your research might fit into that special issue, we'd be very grateful to have submissions from the group. But as I say, I'll circulate more information about that in the new year. So two things. The next seminar is the 22nd of January. We hope to see some of you there, and look out for the call for papers for the special issue on music and hearing loss for Music and Science in the new year. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming at a really busy time of year. Really appreciate your talks and your thoughts, and we'll see you again soon.